It was supposed to be a routine summit at Buckingham Palace until Princess Catherine rose from her seat, her eyes blazing, and delivered words that stunned the entire royal court. Even King Charles froze, and Camilla's mask of composure cracked. The air that morning had already felt dense, as though centuries of quiet grievances had thickened into an invisible fog above the long oak table. Courtiers shifted nervously along the walls, shuffling papers they dared not look at. This was meant to be just another meeting, a sterile discussion of protocol, public appearances, and a few inevitable apologies to smooth over the family's mounting scandals. Yet, it became something else entirely. The high-level family summit had been called to confront what insiders politely referred to as internal misunderstandings, though everyone present knew that was only a royal euphemism for betrayal, bitterness, and resentment. Whispers of sabotage and backroom deals had plagued the palace for months. Headlines flared almost daily now, questioning the monarchy's stability. Behind closed doors, the fractures were even deeper. Charles sat at the head of the table, face pale, his voice calm but with a distinct tremor. Camilla sat at his right, her chin high, flanked by allies who exuded the quiet confidence of a woman who had learned long ago how to navigate scandal unscathed. And then there was Catherine. She entered the room composed, her eyes steady, her spine perfectly straight, but the weight she carried was not something many could see. She had learned just days earlier of Camilla's secret maneuvers, an elaborate scheme to chip away at her position, her reputation, and her standing as the heart of the next generation of royals. For years she had endured Camilla's quiet dismissals, the calculated slights, the whispered stories to favored journalists. But this was something else. This was treachery, written down, deliberate, and cruel. For much of the meeting, Catherine remained silent, letting Camilla speak freely, watching her bask in her supposed control. But her stillness was not weakness, it was patience. Camilla spoke about upcoming engagements, about reorganizing the staff for efficiency, and about modernizing the monarchy code. Catherine now knew, for pushing her further into the shadows. All around the table, the atmosphere thickened, heavy with expectation, but no one spoke. Just as the agenda was about to close, with Charles preparing to stand and signal the end of the session, Catherine's voice rang out, sharp enough to stop even the faint scratching of pens. "There is something," she began, her tone even, "that I cannot stay silent about anymore." The words hung in the air, chilling the room more effectively than any winter wind. All eyes turned to her as she slowly rose, her chair sliding back against the marble floor, and placed a thick envelope on the polished table. The room froze. Catherine's gaze didn't waver. Even William, seated beside her, looked at her as though seeing his wife fully for the very first time, as a woman who would no longer endure in silence. Camilla's composure, so carefully honed, flickered for the first time. The queen consort shifted in her chair, eyes narrowing, but she said nothing. It was in that stillness between the ancient walls of Buckingham Palace that everyone present realized something irreversible was unfolding before their eyes. The betrayal Catherine had uncovered was about to change everything, and as she looked from face to face, meeting every gaze with quiet defiance, one question began to echo through the room like an ominous drumbeat. But what betrayal had Catherine uncovered, and how far back did this treachery stretch into the royal shadows? For years, they played the part of united royals, but behind closed doors, a quiet war raged between Catherine and Camilla, one waged with whispers, sabotage, and veiled threats. What the public saw was a carefully rehearsed display of harmony. Smiles during garden parties, polite exchanges at balcony appearances, even the occasional warm glance in church. But beneath that polished surface, resentment and rivalry festered. From the moment Catherine married William, she became the darling of the public, her grace, her warmth, her unshakable calm capturing the hearts of millions who still longed for the spirit of Diana. And that was precisely where the trouble began. Camilla, who had spent decades clawing her way into acceptance, watched as the young duchess eclipsed her almost overnight. It was subtle at first, Camilla's quiet jealousy manifesting in slight but noticeable ways. Invitations to key meetings would mysteriously fail to reach Catherine, only for her to learn later that decisions about major events had already been made without her input. In royal briefings, Camilla would suggest Catherine needed more time to grow into her role, conveniently leaving her out of critical photo opportunities or high-profile engagements. Over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes, Camilla reportedly wielded her influence over Charles with precision. Those close to the family whispered that she regularly planted doubts in his mind, questioning Catherine's readiness, her judgment, and even her loyalty to tradition. Gradually, Catherine's visibility at certain royal occasions began to diminish. Events she once dominated were reassigned, her presence strategically minimized, her spotlight dimmed by careful hands. To the world, it appeared Catherine was simply stepping back, but to those who paid closer attention, it was clear she was being pushed. Catherine endured years of subtle humiliation, seated just a little further away at critical moments, ushered out of private discussions, and stripped of influence in matters where her voice once carried weight. Even her own staff began to feel the chill, their requests delayed, their authority quietly undercut. It wasn't enough to ruin her, but it was enough to wound her, and it was enough to ensure that every triumph she achieved came at the cost of a private battle no one else could see. Courtiers, ever sensitive to palace tensions, began whispering about Camilla's growing resentment toward Catherine's rising star. They said Camilla saw in her not just a rival, but a threat, a younger woman with Diana's fire and the public's love, standing in sharp contrast to her own more guarded reputation. Words like Diana-like began to circulate in the press, and Catherine's popularity only soared higher each time she appeared in public, further fueling Camilla's quiet fury. All the while, William urged his wife to stay patient, reminding her that the monarchy demanded endurance, not defiance. But even he could sense the walls closing in around her, and Catherine, though outwardly composed, began to gather evidence, recording incidents, saving messages, memorizing conversations. Her patience, however, was not infinite. But patience has limits, and it was a single devastating discovery that finally broke Catherine's silence. What Catherine found in a confidential briefing document would shake her to her core and reveal Camilla's betrayal in black and white. It happened almost by accident, though nothing about that palace ever truly happened without reason. Late one evening, while waiting in her private office for William to return from yet another meeting with his father, Catherine noticed a thick, leather folder left carelessly on the corner of the desk. It was marked simply, "For His Majesty's eyes only," but curiosity mixed with instinct compelled her to open it. What she read inside would forever change how she saw the woman seated next to the king. The papers were meticulous, clearly prepared by Camilla's closest aides for Charles to consider before the upcoming summit. They didn't merely question Catherine's fitness for her role, they outright condemned it. The first page alone struck like a blade. The Duchess of Cambridge is too soft to endure the scrutiny required of her position. Her modern demeanor threatens the stability of the monarchy. Recommendation: her ceremonial role should be restricted, effective immediately. Catherine's breath caught. Line after line painted her as a liability, a sentimental figure unfit for the demands of the crown. And then she saw handwritten notes in the margins, unmistakably Camilla's own, underlining certain phrases and scribbling suggestions like, "Leverage press narrative plant stories to confirm weakness." It was more than just a private opinion. This was strategy. A coordinated campaign to diminish her in the eyes of the public, of Charles, and of the institution itself. Page after page referenced meetings with trusted journalists, and suggested op-eds that would gently but firmly nudge public perception away from her and toward Camilla. Reading further, Catherine felt her hands grow cold. One note even referenced her children: "Avoid involving the young ones for now, but keep options open should the need arise." That was when rage finally replaced disbelief. She closed the folder, her fingers trembling but her resolve hardening. The next morning, she summoned one of the aides whose name appeared in the notes. The woman arrived pale and tense, already seeming to know what was coming. When confronted, she broke down almost immediately, tearfully admitting that Camilla had orchestrated the entire plan. "We thought it was best for the family," she sobbed, but Catherine heard nothing but betrayal echoing in her mind. When she recounted everything to William, his reaction was instant and ferocious. He paced the room like a caged animal, his face red with fury. "She's crossed a line this time," he spat. "If they want war, they'll have it, and you won't fight it alone." His hands clasped hers tightly, as though grounding them both to reality. But Catherine knew reality had already shifted. This wasn't just palace politics anymore. This was personal. It was calculated. And it demanded a reckoning. As the day of the summit approached, she resolved that this was the moment. No more silence. No more waiting. She would bring the truth into the light, where everyone could see it, and force them all to choose between quiet, complicity, and conscience. But even Catherine couldn't predict the emotional firestorm her revelation would ignite when she finally spoke. Standing before the most powerful family in Britain, Catherine chose to risk everything: her reputation, her place, even her marriage, by exposing Camilla's schemes in front of them all. The air inside the grand chamber was thick with anticipation. Every breath held as though the walls themselves sensed what was about to unfold. She didn't hesitate. Not this time. Rising from her chair with quiet authority, Catherine gripped the envelope in her hand like a sword, her voice cutting through centuries of royal silence as she began. All around her, heads turned. The sound of her voice was sharp, steady, and unflinching, as she read aloud from the very documents she'd discovered, each line more damning than the last. She spoke of the calculated plan to undermine her, the whispered slander fed to the tabloids, the insidious campaign to strip her of ceremonial influence. Gasps escaped from the assembled family as she laid bare the betrayal, each word a blow to the fragile veneer of unity that had held this family together. Charles, seated at the head of the table, visibly winced. His eyes, once commanding, closed briefly, as though wishing to block out the truth that could no longer be ignored. Camilla's composure faltered. At first, she tried to interrupt, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, but Catherine's resolve was unshakable. Her voice rose above the Queen Consort's protests, firm and unyielding, refusing to let her drown the truth in polite denials. Every sentence Catherine delivered struck with precision, exposing not only Camilla's schemes but also the quiet complicity that allowed them to flourish. And in that moment, the room was hers. Camilla's mask of calm cracked completely as Catherine continued, her fury breaking through for all to see. What had been concealed behind smiles and courtesies was now on full display. Anger, fear, and indignation, mingling into an expression no amount of royal training could disguise. She reached for words that failed her, her usual wit and cunning useless against the brutal clarity of what Catherine had unleashed. At the other end of the table, William sat motionless, his gaze fixed on his wife with something deeper than admiration, something like awe. And then, just as Catherine finished reading, the silence in the room deepened, and he spoke. Quiet but deliberate, his words hung like a crown above the chaos. "Bravo, Catherine." That single phrase punctuated the moment, sealing it in history as the day one woman refused to bow to a dynasty's unspoken rules. For an instant, no one moved, no one dared speak, as if even the palace itself was stunned into submission by her defiance. But beneath that silence, cracks began to form, fractures that no one present could ignore anymore. But Catherine's courage came at a cost, and the palace erupted into chaos as alliances fractured before their eyes. Camilla wasn't about to be humiliated without striking back, and her fury would threaten to tear the monarchy apart from within. The silence after Catherine's final words barely lasted a breath before Camilla's anger erupted into the room like a storm long held at bay. Her voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the air as she accused Catherine of overstepping her station, of daring to humiliate the very crown she claimed to serve. Every ounce of restraint she had mastered over decades dissolved into unfiltered rage. She called Catherine reckless, selfish, ungrateful, spitting out each word like a curse. And then she turned her fury on William. Pointing at him, Camilla's accusations deepened. She claimed he had enabled Catherine's rebellion, that he had stood by while his wife embarrassed the monarchy and shattered its dignity. She demanded to know how he, as the future king, could tolerate such defiance. William did not flinch. He did not look away. His silence, cold and unyielding, seemed only to fuel her anger further. The tension between them, once hidden under layers of formality, now blazed in full view of every witness. Around them, palace aides scrambled, trying desperately to defuse the confrontation before it descended further. Quiet pleas of, "Your Majesty, please," and "Perhaps we should adjourn," fell on deaf ears as Camilla raged on, her words now spilling into accusations about loyalty, about respect, about the fragile illusion of control she had fought so hard to maintain. Charles, at last, tried to intervene. Rising slowly, he raised a hand in a futile attempt to calm her, but Camilla turned on him just as fiercely. Her fury, unrestrained now, shouted down even the king himself. She accused him of weakness, of letting Catherine trample over tradition, of failing to protect her from this public humiliation. His face paled, but his words never came. He simply lowered his hand and fell silent, watching as his wife unraveled before the throne she believed was hers to command. Then, with a final wordless glare at Catherine, one that seemed to promise vengeance rather than retreat, Camilla spun on her heel and stormed out. The sound of the grand doors slamming behind her reverberated through the chamber like a cannon shot. It was a sound no one in the room would ever forget. Those who witnessed it whispered later that it was the ugliest scene Buckingham Palace had endured in decades. Centuries of protocol shattered in minutes, leaving nothing but fractured loyalties and stunned silence in its wake. But the damage was done, and now the royal family was forced to confront an unthinkable question: who truly belonged at the heart of the monarchy? Even before the palace could control the narrative, whispers of Catherine's stand against Camilla escaped, and the public erupted in support. What began as murmurs in private corridors spread like wildfire across Britain and beyond, carried on the breath of every witness who could not keep quiet about what they had seen. Within hours, the story broke. Headlines screamed of a dramatic confrontation, of a duchess who had stood her ground against the queen consort in the heart of Buckingham Palace itself. Social media lit up instantly, a torrent of voices uniting in admiration and outrage. Hashtags like #Bravo Catherine and #Queen in Waiting surged to the top of trending lists worldwide. Millions reposted and commented on speculative accounts of what had transpired, with every detail scrutinized and celebrated. Short clips of palace reporters, hurriedly recounting what they'd heard, went viral, while commentators praised Catherine as a figure of courage in a world that too often demanded silence from women in power. The comparisons to Diana were inevitable, and they were relentless. Commentators and columnists drew direct lines between Catherine's stand and the late princess's own defiance decades earlier. "Diana's fire burns in Catherine," one editorial declared. Images of the two women, one gone, one still fighting, were spliced together and shared like a rallying cry. The public, it seemed, had chosen its side with breathtaking speed and clarity. For Camilla, the backlash was swift and merciless. Once carefully managed, public goodwill toward the queen consort evaporated overnight. Her approval ratings, already fragile in the wake of her controversial past, plummeted. For the first time in years, royal watchers openly questioned whether her role was tenable. Anonymous palace aides confessed that even some of her staunchest allies began to distance themselves as the storm of public opinion grew louder. Letters and emails flooded the palace in droves. Some came from longtime monarchists pleading for Charles to intervene and restore harmony. Others were sharp, uncompromising demands for justice, urging him to stand by Catherine and reject Camilla's schemes. The monarchy, so accustomed to controlling the narrative, suddenly found itself at the mercy of its people. The old balance of power had shifted yet again, and the echoes of Diana's legacy rang louder than ever before. For years, the palace had treated the public as an audience, but now the audience had found its voice. Once again, it was the people who forced the monarchy to confront its own hypocrisy, its own blind spots, and its own unwillingness to evolve. The tides of history were pulling at the foundation of Buckingham Palace, threatening to drag it into waters from which it might never fully recover. And as the nation rallied behind her, one figure finally emerged from the shadows to deliver the verdict everyone feared and anticipated. Faced with the crown's survival and the fracture of his own family, Charles was forced to confront the woman he loved and the future queen he couldn't ignore. The silence after the public's eruption was deafening inside Buckingham Palace. For days, Charles said nothing. No statements, no appearances, not even a hint of where his loyalties lay. But behind the scenes, he summoned Catherine to Windsor for a private audience. There, in the quiet of a room heavy with history, he reportedly looked at her and confessed what few thought he would ever admit, that he had failed her, that he had seen but chosen not to act, and that it was her courage, not his, that had laid bare what he should have confronted long ago. His apology was simple but profound. He reportedly told her, "You deserved my protection. I gave you none, and yet you stood where even I could not." For Catherine, it was not absolution she sought, but acknowledgement. And Charles, for the first time, gave it to her. But that was only the beginning. Later that same day, he demanded a separate meeting with Camilla. Those close to the scene described the encounter as thunderous. For years, he had shielded her, defended her against every accusation and doubt. But now, cornered between duty and desire, he finally let go of pretense. "This ends now, or everything ends," he reportedly warned her. The queen consort, once unassailable in her influence over him, sat stunned as Charles spelled out what he would no longer tolerate. No more scheming, no more whispers, no more private wars dressed as public service. Within hours, palace aides received direct orders: halt all public appearances with Camilla until further notice. Cancel events, rewrite speeches, remove her name from scheduled engagements. The machinery of the monarchy pivoted sharply, and for the first time in decades, Camilla found herself on the outside of decisions she once orchestrated. Rumors swirled in the wake of that confrontation. Whispers of divorce lawyers being quietly consulted, of secret negotiations to soften a blow that had already been delivered in full view of the world. The palace refused to comment, but in every corner of the court, eyes widened at the possibility of an outcome even more shocking than Catherine's rebellion. Days later, William reportedly joined his father for an unplanned meeting. The words exchanged between them remain mostly unspoken to the public, but one phrase, overheard by an aide, lingered in the corridors of power. "Thank you for seeing her truth." Yet beneath the surface of these decisive moves, the monarchy teetered on the brink of its greatest internal crisis in a century. The question was no longer whether Catherine was strong enough to endure the crown, but whether the crown itself could withstand the storm she had unleashed. But as the storm calmed inside the palace, a single question remained. Had Catherine just secured her place as the future queen, or doomed herself to a lifetime of royal isolation? In the end, it wasn't just the betrayal she exposed, but the future she illuminated. And as she stepped into the corridor, head high, the whispers began, "Queen Catherine." The summit was over, but its aftermath lingered in every corner of Buckingham Palace. Catherine emerged from that room visibly composed but undeniably transformed. Whatever fear she had carried into the chamber was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that she no longer walked in anyone's shadow. Though the air was still heavy with tension, her stride betrayed no hesitation, no regret. As she and William exited the palace together, he reportedly took her hand, lifted it to his lips, and whispered just 4 words that hung in her memory like a vow: "I'm proud of you." His voice was soft but resolute, an acknowledgement not only of what she had endured, but also of what she had become. From that moment, Catherine's presence seemed to grow larger than the roles they had once tried to confine her to. Behind her, the palace buzzed with murmurs. Courtiers, some once skeptical of her strength, now spoke of her as the heart of the monarchy, a phrase whispered with both awe and caution. In private conversations, her name carried new weight, her opinion sought out in meetings where once she was merely present but unheard. Staff began to treat her differently, bowing just slightly lower, deferring just a moment longer, sensing the subtle but undeniable shift in power. And yet, not everyone dared to meet her gaze. Camilla remained secluded in her chambers, refusing to be seen for days, her absence as loud as her fury had been. She did not attend scheduled engagements, nor did she issue any statements. The silence from her side only deepened the sense of Catherine's victory. Beyond the palace walls, the public's devotion to Catherine showed no sign of waning. Crowds gathered outside royal residences, some holding banners with her name, others chanting their support. Letters continued to pour in, each one more passionate than the last, hailing her not only as a duchess but as the rightful moral center of the family. Hashtags celebrating her courage continued to trend, her photos splashed across front pages and television screens alike. But perhaps most striking of all was what happened behind closed doors. Catherine's influence began to stretch quietly, almost imperceptibly, into realms she'd never fully occupied before. Meetings with advisors grew longer, her suggestions no longer taken as polite input but as serious counsel. Slowly, methodically, she began to shape what many now saw as the dawn of a new chapter for the monarchy, a chapter written in her voice. Because when a princess dares to speak the truth at the heart of Buckingham Palace, the echoes are impossible to silence. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.